mentioned in the previous conversation with you and some other articles, this is a point which is very often not really appreciated by the Western media, both leftist and the mainstream media, because actually it seems that Western public doesn't really care about what's happening with the Russian society as such. So in that sense, very often, if you read Western media, it seems that Russia is a kind of monolithic country which is controlled by an autocratic government. The government is presented in a very negative way, but nobody discusses what's happening with and in the society. And yes, this is exactly what I mentioned before, that September elections of 2021, which were held in the conditions of not only vote rigging, but also tremendous pressure on the opposition, with quite a few opposition candidates not even being able to participate and so on. In the situation with the total control of the media and repression and so on, still led to the collapse of United Russia vote in most important centers like Moscow, St. Petersburg, Ekaterinburg, in Siberia, and so on and so on. They lost the election. They failed it miserably, even though they did everything to prevent opposition from actually campaigning or really being able to compete for votes properly. And of course, that led to the situation when vote rigging went up to the levels which were unexperienced even in Russia. Because yes, vote rigging is normal, electoral fraud is kind of normal, but they went up to the levels which were unprecedented even for Russian standards. Like in Moscow, the candidates of United Russia lost most of the constituencies by far, and then the day after the election, after the votes were already counted, they recounted votes, saying that there was so-called electronic voting, online voting, and also they said that online voting allowed people to re-vote, to kind of reconsider their vote. So they said that, well, most people who voted online reconsidered their votes, and instead of voting for the opposition, they post factum voted for the government party, which was a tremendous scandal, provoking also opposition rallies, and there was a new wave of repression after that, and so on. But the election was only a symptom. It was not that much of a problem. It was only a symptom, because it has shown that the level of popularity, not only for the United Russia Party, but also for Putin and for the system, for the regime, was extremely low, and was going under, really going under. Putin's popularity, according to some polls, went down to the level of, say, 20%, which was unprecedented. And at that point, they really needed to do something to kind of reunite the society, to get some kind of realignment around the president, the government, the regime, and so on, and at the same time kind of restructure the system, turning it into more controlled, even more authoritarian, or even quite kind of totalitarian, to reconsolidate the system around Putin and so on. If you read what pro-government pundits and even some officials were writing and saying about, say, Ukraine or about Russian people and so on. It was very much like the traditional Nazi stuff, like what, like now they use these terms, one nation, one leader, for example. This is already part of the official language. One nation, one leader. One country, one nation, one leader, and one victory, as they say. That's the official slogan. So it's very much what the Third Reich was using in the Second World War. By the way, it doesn't mean that Russia is getting fascist. It's not true. It's the fact is that some segments of Russian current leadership wanted, I stress, wanted Russia to become a fascist country, and they failed to achieve it. They failed. It's another failure. It's like failing the war. They're also failing fascism. They're failing everything, including the attempts to make Russia a fascist country. It's another failure. But anyhow, that was part of the project. So you have to start a war, and this war is going to be a tremendous and very fast success. Ukraine is going to collapse within hours or days, and then we will have this incredible triumph. That we will kind of reconsolidate the country, and Putin will be national hero again. And well, it will be very much like in 2014, when after the annexation of Crimea, the country was more or less reconsolidated around the slogan of Crimean consensus. And it was true, by the way, that people did see the annexation of Crimea as a positive thing, partly because Crimean population welcomed the annexation, don't forget that. And they wanted to replay the Crimean consensus, to remake it. They failed. They failed, and now they're facing the consequences.
So, in the time that we have remaining, I want to talk about some related issues to that. One of the things about the Russian army that I've talked about in several videos that is very interesting, especially for those of us in the United States, is the way in which the military is, to a large extent, comprised of soldiers on the front lines who come from the poorest parts of the country, who are often economically living on the margins in extreme poverty, for whom the military is sort of a way out. It's a career, it's a way to support their families. And so we find that many of these regions provide so much of the cannon fodder that is dying in Ukraine. So my question for you then is, those regions, especially places like Dagestan and Chechnya and elsewhere that have provided so many of these soldiers, do we see any evidence of unrest? Say mothers of dead soldiers who are speaking to each other. This is a phenomenon we've seen in many countries, in many wars, in many contexts. So I want to get a sense of, from your perspective, what's happening outside of St. Petersburg and Moscow in some of these other parts of the country.
First of all, there are different regions. Russia is not only a huge country, it's also a country which is composed of very different regions with very different societies. And for example, if we are speaking about Northern Caucasus, yes, quite a few people who serve in the army and serve in Ukraine are coming from these regions. But in a certain sense, for those regions, it's also a chance to make some kind of career and escape from poverty. And so far, we don't see any signs of unrest in the Northern Caucasus. At the same time, there are also plenty of people who are coming from depressed Russian regions with ethnic Russian population, but especially these are rural areas. And these villages are remote from each other. So sometimes it's hundreds or thousands of kilometers between these villages. So there is very little communication. So even when you learn that 5 or 10 people died in that or this village, it doesn't make any difference because there is total discommunication between these places. So in that sense, the major source of opposition used to be and is in the big cities. But don't forget, Russia is a country of quite a few big cities, and here people are getting increasingly angry. And also in some regions which are close to Ukrainian border, you find the mood which is changing. First of all, yes, when I was in Kursk, for example, just recently, there was always news about people who got killed there, not necessarily from the city itself, but also from the province. And people were angry. And in places like Kursk or Belgorod, close to Ukrainian frontier, there are quite a few people who have relatives on the other side of the border who are also communicating with them, who are reporting the devastation which is taking place in Ukraine, the damage caused by the Russian army, and that is influencing the public opinion. So these provinces are getting increasingly unloyal to the central government. And the other very interesting example is Buryatia. It's also a very poor ethnic area, and Buryats were also very important in terms of providing cannon fodder for the army. And now there is a strong movement in Buryatia. It's probably the first major ethnic region of Russia with a strong anti-war movement. And interestingly enough, they are going to have elections there in 2 days from now, the election of the governor of the province. There are a Communist Party candidate, which is